Вот уже начинаются вопросы, да?
Hello, thank you for your lecture. It was a pleasure to meet you for the first time in my life. I would like to ask you one question which is being discussed right now. Could you please comment on the network neutrality initiative which is taking place in USA? I'm not going to explain what it means, if you please. Okay.
Will you introduce yourself?
Thank you. That's a very timely question indeed. This problem is not just in the United States. The net neutrality issue arises because there is concern that the provider of broadband access to the internet may have too much control over what is allowed to be done with that connection. So the worry we have in the United States is that there isn't very much competition for broadband access to the internet. We might have one telephone company and one cable company competing with each other for the business of the consumers. Sometimes you only have one provider, a telephone company or a cable company, but not even two. So we don't have very much competition. The problem is that the telephone companies and the cable companies offer not only access to the internet, but they offer other products and services, for example, television programming. So you can imagine a cable company that sells access to the internet and also sells subscription to cable TV might say, I really don't want my internet connection to deliver video because that competes with my other service that I want people to pay for. So some of us were worried that there would be abuse of the control of the broadband pipe to discriminate against competition at higher levels of the system and application space. So there's been a strong argument for legislation that says you cannot use control of the broadband channel that gives access to the internet to benefit your higher value-added services in favor against another competitor. That's what the neutrality was all about. Unfortunately, the telephone companies and the cable companies who don't want any regulation at all twisted the definition and meaning of net neutrality in such a way as to make it all very confusing. And I'm sure that you recognize this as a standard tactic. If you don't want the legislature or the Congress or the legislative body to pass any laws, you try to confuse all of the legislators as quickly as you can with technical terms and legal argument so that nothing happens. And that's where we are right now. Nothing is happening. Our Federal Communications Commission is responsible for the oversight of communications in all of its forms. And its ability to oversee internet is in question right now because there isn't adequate legislation to support that. So many of us, including me and my company, are interested in at least getting serious discussion about this kind of issue into our Congress in order to pass legislation that will support openness and freedom for access to consumers to every application and to eliminate discrimination that would be harmful either to companies providing applications or harmful to users who are seeking to use the internet. That dispute is not over, and it's not unique to the United States. The same issue is coming up in Europe. The same issue has come up in Australia and New Zealand. It has come up in France. It's come up in Korea and in Japan. And in some of the countries where the regulatory bodies are very strong, the problem has been solved because the regulator has said you must not discriminate against applications coming from a competitor. You must keep the network open so that all parties have an equal opportunity to provide products and services. Well, I hope that's the outcome everywhere where this issue comes up, but of course we can't know that until we live through it. Okay, next question.
Thank you. My name is Mitra. I'm a fourth-year student of this university. How will microformats transform our browsing experience? So, will the web finally become semantic enough to enable any user to discern only relevant information? For example, take Safari fourth take on this, their article body finder feature. So, could you please comment on this?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part of the question because the microphone was over here.
Take the example of Safari 4 article body finder feature. So will this feature, the Semantic Web, develop in the near future? Thank you.
I'm sorry that Tim Berners-Lee isn't here to answer that question. Those of you who aren't making the distinction should remember the internet is kind of like the road system. And Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web, which is like the cars that are going on the roads. But I do have an opinion about this, and we actually care quite a bit about it at Google. One of the problems in the internet today is that when you're indexing the World Wide Web, the only thing we are seeing is text for the most part. The only thing that we really can easily index is the text of the net. So when you do a search, what you're really doing is saying, please tell me any web pages that have these words in them. Now, what Tim notices correctly is that there's also a lot of information on the net which is not expressed in that form. It's not written in HTML or XML. It's in databases. And the databases are accessible through a web page, but you usually have to interact with the database by typing a question to the database to get an answer back. Well, that information in the database can't be indexed by what we call the web crawlers, because the web crawlers can only see already existing web pages, not the data that's behind them. So this means that there's a lot of dark information in the internet. And Tim and others would like to find a way for the databases to express what content they have in a way that you could link together the multiple databases and their information. He calls this deep linking. And he has a fairly elaborate design in mind. I had a good 3-hour discussion with Tim a few months ago and probing him on the question. I will say, though, that it's been quite hard to do because semantics is not an easy thing to capture in some computer manipulable form. And so I have this high hopes, but some skepticism about how quickly we can do this. It's like trying to categorize all the information in the universe with labels of some kind so that we can tell what information is present in the system. And we don't have a universal way of expressing all the semantics. So it's a noble task, but it's also a very hard one. If you were looking for a dissertation topic, this might be a very good one to pick, but I don't know how long it would take you to finish the thesis. Okay, next question.
Good morning, Irina Lulina, Russia to channel point rule. I have a question about so-called inorganic search. Are there any opportunities to influence the results of the search, for example, by government or some business organizations? Thank you.
So, first of all, we would like that no one would interfere with the results of the search. We try to do what we call a neutral search on the internet. There are algorithms that try to figure out the relevance of the various web pages that contain the expressions that someone is searching for. So none of our algorithms are currently influenced by anything other than what we can observe of the way people are searching for information on the network or which pages point to other pages. The core algorithm at Google is called PageRank, and although it's more elaborate now than it was 12 years ago, the basic idea was if lots of web pages point to this page, this must be an important page. And if you found that page during the search, then you make its rank higher because everybody is pointing to it. Now, it's pretty obvious that you could find ways of distorting that particular process by building a whole lot of pages of your own that point to yourself. And so that's called search engine optimization. We try to detect cases like that because they clearly don't reflect the general view of what's important. So the core question that you asked is whether there's anything that governments can do that influence the search. I would say, clearly, we, as you know, had a dispute with the Chinese government earlier this year and decided that although we were operating in China under their rules, that it required us to suppress the responses to some searches. And people criticized us for doing that, and we argued internally for over a year before we decided to go into operation in China and accept that restriction. We decided earlier this year that it just wasn't tolerable, and so we stopped filtering the output. We also don't offer that search engine in Google.cn, Google.china anymore. That search is over in Hong Kong, where we don't filter. This is a tough problem for any company that's operating on a global scale. It certainly is important that if you open up operations in some country, that you want to operate legally in the country. It's not a good business model to say, we're going to operate services in this country and we're going to do it illegally. That's not a good business model. Usually the business doesn't last very long. So you have to decide, am I going to do business there under those rules or not? And we have to make that decision for every country that we operate in. At the same time, we recognize that there are abuses that take place on the net. And we have rules. In the case of YouTube, we have rules about what content we will take off voluntarily. If it's violence, for example, we won't put it up on the net if we know about it. So there are voluntary rules, and there are rules that are imposed on us by local law, and we have to find a way to conform, or we have to decide that we don't do business there. Okay, next question.
Hello.
Yes, over here.
My name is Anastasia. I'm a graduate of this university from the Department of International Journalism, and I would like to ask you a question. In our country, everybody considers you to be one of the fathers of a digital revolution. So, could you tell me what, by your opinion, will be the next revolution? Thank you.
So, first of all, thank you very much. I don't know if it's a big honor or not to be considered the father of a revolution. Considering there have been revolutions here too, and they sort of didn't work out after a while. But to answer your specific question, I can think of 2 or 3 things that are happening right now that show some major promise in this century. The first one has to do with biology and our deep understanding of how biological systems work. We are at the point now where not only do we understand how to get DNA sequences, but we are learning how to interpret the proteins that are produced by interpreting the DNA. We're also learning something about the parts of the DNA that do not produce protein. For a while we thought that was just nonsense material that was ignored. We were wrong. Like almost everything in science, whatever we know now, we discover later is not quite correct. So I think the biological sciences are clearly going to be revolutionary. I'm going to pick another example which I'm quite excited about, and that's the interfacing of our neural systems to electronics. And here we've learned a lot. I'm going to pick on my wife, who's here in the front row, as an example. Sigrid was born with normal hearing, but when she was 3 years old, she lost all of her hearing, so she was deaf. And for over 50 years, she heard nothing. She had to read people's lips to understand them. And then 50 years after losing her hearing, she got what is called a cochlear implant, and I hope that's translatable. This is a piece of electronics that goes into the inner ear, the thing that looks like a little snail. And inside of that is the auditory nerve. There are electrodes that touch the auditory nerve that are part of the electronics that go into the head. This is what is called an outpatient operation. It takes about 45 minutes to put the implant in, and then you wait for about 3 weeks while everything heals. Then you wear, then you attached to that implant is a speech processor that's about the size of, well, Sigrid's holding up the speech processor. This is all the electronics literally go just behind your ear, hanging on your ear, and then there's a little magnet. The magnet holds a cord up so that the inside electronics can receive signals coming from the speech processor. So she went to a university called Johns Hopkins to have the operation done. 2 weeks later, she came back there, and they turned on the speech processor. Basically, it's a microphone that's taking sound in, doing what's called a Fourier transform to figure out which frequencies are present in the sound, and then stimulating electrically the auditory nerve inside of her ear, as if her inner ear was working correctly, and the brain correctly interprets the electronic signals. So this is pretty amazing. At the point when I got home after they turned this on, I had a 50-year-old teenager. I couldn't get her off the telephone as she kept talking to everybody. So what's important about this is that it shows that we know how the brain interprets neural impulses for sensory systems. So we can do this for the eye as well, although it's not as well developed. And someday, I think also a sensory motor system, you could repair damage done to a spinal cord so that people who lose the use of arms or legs could walk again. But it won't stop there. Those techniques repair damage. They repair inability. But there's no reason why we should stop there. Why can't we give people the ability to see much broader range of frequencies than just visible light? Why not allow people to hear the same frequency range that a dog can hear, up to 40,000 hertz? Why not give people the ability to sense, touch much more, let's say, sensitively than human normally can? So extra normal capability may also arise from that. So that's the second one, this sort of neural, bioneural connections. And the third big thing, which I didn't have time to tell you about, but now that you've asked, is the extension of the internet to operate across the solar system. And I know that sounds like science fiction, but this project has been underway since 1998. It's really another standards effort. Just like we standardized TCP/IP, we've standardized protocols that will allow spacecraft to communicate with each other and with Earth all across the solar system using techniques very similar to the internet. We will enter into interplanetary testing at the end of this year. We have spacecraft that are on their way back from rendezvousing with a comet. At the end of the year, we'll be testing from about 80 to 90 light seconds away. We have equipment already on the International Space Station, and there's an organization called the Consultative Committee on Space Data Systems, which your space agency also participates in, which is standardizing these interplanetary protocols. So as time goes on, I expect to see an interplanetary backbone grow as we launch new missions into the solar system. When they complete their primary missions, those spacecraft can be used as nodes of an interplanetary internet. So as you get older, like I am now, I think you will begin to see this interplanetary system grow. It will be used not only to support robotic exploration, but also to support manned exploration of the solar system. And for a person like me who likes science fiction, it's very exciting to be part of that project.
It's a great honor to be talking to you today. My name is Dasha Barinova. I'm also a graduate of MGIMO, and now I'm doing a research at Department of Comparative Politics on national domain names. So the question is on national domain names. Do you think it is important to preserve the connection between the country code top-level domain names and the designated country? If yes, why? And who should be responsible for that? Should it be on the level of the policy, of the state, or of the registry, or by raising awareness of the users by some educational program? Thank you.
That is a very, very timely question. Some of you, if you have been following any of this, will notice that the top-level country code domains written in Latin characters have been transformed from representing the people who are operating in the country into something else. Moldova is an example. Its top-level Latin character domain is .md. And in English, .md means medical doctor. And so the operators of the .md top-level domain have sought to take the Moldova top-level domain and sell it or advertise it as a place to register if you offer medical services. There's another country called Tuvalu. It's another relatively poorly developed country in the Pacific Islands. Its top-level domain is .tv, and I'm sure you can figure out what they are marketing at this point. Colombia recently is offering .co as an alternative to .com and suggesting you should register in .co as a competitor to the .com generic top-level domain. So now I have to give you two answers to this question. The first answer is coming from the dinosaur who's been around for 30 or 40 years in this game, thinking that we ought to keep it the way we intended it to be, which was those were country codes. You should register because you wanted to be known in that country, and it shouldn't have anything to do with playing little games about the interpretation of those two characters. But I have to be realistic about this. The country codes in particular, policy for the country codes belongs to the countries to which they've been assigned. That's been a rule that we adopted a long, long time ago. In fact, there's even an RFC, a request for comments, 1591, which addresses that question. And in the ICANN, there's another document called ICP-1. And in those documents, it is the responsibility of the holder of the top-level domain, of the country code top-level domain, to establish policy and to enforce policy. So ICANN, although it is the one which makes the assignments to an operator of those top-level domains, does not make the policy for their use. So we can have arguments with each other, but there is an important element of sovereignty that needs to be maintained. And the reason for this is partly a practical reason. The man who started and ran the domain name system is Jonathan Postel, who passed away in 1998. One of the things that he was afraid of doing was deciding what's a country, who's responsible for the country, and what identifier should be associated with the country. John did not want to take the responsibility for making that decision. So he discovered that there was a table maintained by the International Standards Organization, specifically by the German Standards Organization, called 3166. And that table has the list of 2-letter and 3-letter country code combinations. So John said, if there's a 2-letter designation for a country or an entity, then it's allowed in the domain name system, and if there isn't one, it is not allowed. That rule has served us pretty well. If, on the other hand, there is international agreement that the rules should be different, I think that requires a decision made on a multilateral basis by the sovereign countries who are part of the country code community. Within the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, there is a country code name support organization, CCNSO, but not every country in the world participates in it. So even that organization would not be capable of making a global decision. The topic could come up in the Internet Governance Forum, and that would not be a bad venue in which to have the debate. But at the moment, responsibility rests with the countries who are responsible for those top-level domains.
My name is David Pelek. I'm the student of this university. I have a question. Do you believe in God? And what do you think is the mission of your life?
My life?
Yeah.
Wow. Talk about it. Couldn't you have stopped the questions before that one? Okay. That's a very interesting and hard question to answer. Let me take the mission part first because that's the easier of the two. The mission part for me, for a very long part of my life, has been to try to get more internet built because I believe so strongly that it's a powerful infrastructure that helps people share their knowledge. And for me, that's been a mission for a long time. My title at Google is Chief Internet Evangelist, and it really means that my purpose is to try to get the rest of the world online. Remember, only about 25 or 26% of the world's population has access to the internet right now, and I would like it to be closer to 100%. So clearly there's a long way to go. When people ask me questions like, do I believe in God and what religion am I? I have to tell you a bad joke. Now, I hope I don't have to explain it too much because that always ruins the jokes. Some of you, I'm sure, know the term Greek Orthodox. You have the major Eastern Orthodox or Russian Orthodox activity here. It's part of the more general Eastern Orthodox community. Well, the term, I think you also know the term geek. And I'm a geek. And when people ask me what religion I am, I tell them I'm geek Orthodox. So I don't know if I believe in God the way you might think. But I look at how interesting the world is. I look at the beauty of some of the laws of physics that we discover. And oh, by the way, I also look at how we discovered we don't know as much as we thought we did. In the beginning of the 20th century, we thought we knew pretty much everything there was to know about the universe. The only thing we needed to do was to get the physical constants more accurate. Here at the beginning of the 21st century, we discover we know about 5% of the matter in the universe, and we know nothing about dark energy. We know nothing about dark matter. So we know literally less now, 20 times less now than we did 100 years ago. So I look at all this and I say, this has to have some rationale behind it because the simplicity is so elegant. But I don't know more than that. So I appreciate what I see in the universe, but I don't know exactly where it came from. And I wish I did, because like everyone else in the world, I wonder, how did this all get started? And I think that's all the time we have.